Well, if you have your Bible, you can open up to Luke chapter 10. That's where we're going to spend our time tonight, Luke chapter 10. I want to do a quick test and see how well all of us know, but when you ask somebody how they're doing, you're going to get a variety of responses. But in this day, what a lot of the response I get when I ask people, how are you doing? They say, I'm okay. I say, I'm okay. We have a lot less people doing good, a lot more people doing okay right now, it seems like. And then when I say, why just okay? I hear something very, very frequently. They say, well, I'm just so busy, right? Or another word might be, I'm so tired. We live in an incredibly busy culture these days. Did you know that compared to about 40 to 50 years ago, the average American, working American, works about 150 hours a year more than we did about 40 to 50 years ago? We're constantly working, and here's the reality. I think even that number takes away the fact that most of us, when we get home, we pull out our cell phones, and we're still working when we're at home too, right? Because we're all busy. But as I started thinking about, as we're looking at Luke chapter 10 tonight, I started thinking about the fact that a lot of us are busy. And I have good news for all of us. It's not going to get any better. I don't know, that's probably not good news. But I do have some good news. That despite the fact that we're not going to slow down, like our culture, there's no track that our culture is on that's going to slow down. And one of the things that I get concerned about when I'm busy, one of my greatest fears is that I would succeed in things that don't matter. That in my busyness, I'm going to succeed in some form or fashion in the things that really don't matter. That I'm going to look back later on and I'm going to say, man, I was really good at that. And I don't care that I was. Man, I was so busy. I spent so much time on that. But if I could go back and do it all over again, I never would have spent time on that. I have a great fear that I'm going to succeed in the things that don't matter. So how do you and I focus on the things that matter? How do we find our fulfillment in this crazy, busy world? We're going to look at this passage and kind of take, hopefully, a little bit different direction than what most of us are used to as we look at this passage, the story of Mary and Martha in Luke chapter 10. Here's what it says. Starting in verse 38, it says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, they were headed to Jerusalem, it says he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. Now I want to pause for just a second before we continue on and get to where we're going, because this is a lot like last week when Craig talked about the woman at the well and how Jesus responded to this woman and how crazy it was in those days that Jesus would respond to women the way he did. This is another one of those stories because this is a story of Jesus honoring women as disciples. Honoring women as disciples. Look what's happening. Jesus has come to Mary and Martha's house. They're sisters. He's come to their house. And Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus, the position and the posture of a disciple. Now for us in this day, like that idea kind of passes us and just blows right past us. But if we had people from all over the world, if we had a lot of women in here from all over the world, particularly from certain religions of the world, if they came in here and they heard this passage and they heard about Jesus and this woman that was sitting at his feet, it would absolutely blow their minds. And back in these days, this was a mind-blowing concept. This is a revolutionary concept. These stories that we see in Scripture about how Jesus treated women and how he respected women are so important that we can't neglect and we can't look over the fact that he treated women with dignity, with grace. He wasn't patronizing them. He wasn't just being nice to them. He loved and valued people. He welcomed them into his circle of friends. He welcomed them into his followers, his group of his followers. Jesus was constantly showing value to women and honoring women as his disciples. So I wanted to make sure we don't miss that part. We're not going to talk really much more about that because the rest of it is for all of us tonight. So it says, verse 39, Martha had a sister called Mary who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. Martha was what? Martha was what? Distracted. Some of you guys have already gotten text messages on your cell phone since we've opened up God's Word, and you're already distracted. It's easy to get distracted. All of us can be distracted at times. If you've ever been distracted, raise your hand. Let's say I. Let's say all of us have been this way. Okay. So Martha, just like the rest of us, it says Martha was distracted by all the preparations that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all the work by myself? Tell her to help me. Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. And I want to give a disclaimer as before we begin to unpack this and look at this, that I think a lot of us in the room, we might be groaning. Particularly women, a lot of women, they hear this passage, they're like, oh man, Mary and Martha, you're going to tell me to stop doing all the work and just be still, just sit at Jesus' feet and all that kind of stuff. And you know, I don't know, I relate to Martha. I don't know if any of you relate to Martha. I relate to Martha in this story. And I sit here, and some of you, you know, you think, you know, if I was there, here's what I would say to Jesus. Fine, Jesus, I'll sit at your feet. You can make your own dinner. You can get glasses of water for everybody else. You can even do the dishes when all this is over, right? That's how a lot of us feel. I relate most with Martha. Most of us in this day relate most with Martha. Anybody else in the room say, you know what, I relate with Martha. Like, I want to do stuff. I'm busy all the time. I want to go do things. How many of you guys are like, I would rather just sit still and not do anything at all, right? Most of us in the room, if we're honest, we say, you know what, I'm more of a Martha, that I'm constantly busy. I'm constantly doing things. My issue is probably being more distracted than it is being lazy. Right? That I'm constantly so busy that I'm distracted with other things. I miss out on some of the important things because of that. Most of us relate to Martha. But I want to point out, she's not doing anything crazy. She's not doing anything evil. You know, she's probably making sure the house is in order. She's probably getting some food ready. She probably is getting, you know, a glass of water for everybody in the house. She's probably, you know, just doing things that actually needed to be done. And I think sometimes Martha is kind of villainized in this story, and I don't think it's fair. But it does say in the New American Standard Translation, it says that Martha was distracted with all her preparations, and it literally means, not all her preparations, literally means with much service. Martha was serving people, and that was a distraction for her. Serving people was a distraction for her. So here's what she does. She comes to Jesus, she says, doesn't it seem unfair to you that I'm doing all the work while my sister's just sitting here doing nothing, right? My sister's just sitting here. Do you not care? And I don't know about you, especially if you've ever worked on a team. Maybe when you were in school, you did group projects and you were the one that had to do everything. Maybe you work on a team at work. Maybe you were on a team of sports or anything like that. Whatever team you might have been on. Some kind of committee, some kind of group, maybe you're a PTO president or something like that. Maybe you're in a group of some kind and you say, you know what, I feel like I'm the one doing all this work. And have you ever had a time where you're the one doing work and you're thinking in the back of your head, I know those people aren't working back there, right? And here's what begins to happen more and more. You're literally just sitting there doing whatever work needs to be done. You know, you're doing the dishes and they're just sitting there watching TV and you just kind of get yourself worked up more and more and more and more. And you get so frustrated. This is what was happening. You can see it. This is what was happening to Martha because she didn't go to her sister and say, hey, Mary, can you come help me, please? She goes to Jesus. Says, Jesus, don't you see how hard I'm working? Doesn't it seem unfair to you, Jesus? You see, Jesus, that I'm working hard, right? Can you tell my sister to come and help me? I think all of us, maybe we kind of get in these kind of times where we get so caught up in our thoughts that reality begins to disappear. Because now not only is she mad at Mary, she says, Jesus, doesn't it seem unfair? Don't you even care? Now she's pointing fingers not just at Mary. She comes to Jesus, she's pointing fingers at Jesus. You don't even care that I'm working so hard, Jesus. You don't even care. We get so caught up in our thoughts sometimes that we begin to lose the reality. And Jesus responds with kindness and grace. This isn't a Martha, Martha, what is wrong with you? This isn't that kind of statement. This is a statement of kindness. He says, Martha, You're so worried and distracted and caught up and upset by all of these things. Jesus is actually looking after Martha's soul. Actually looking after Martha's soul. Here's why I think that what she was doing was actually an issue. This is why I think she was a little bit distracted. This is why I think her service became a distraction for her. Because I think she was working for herself. Now, I think about it like in today's situation, like what would it look like for us to kind of be in a similar situation where we're working for ourselves? What would that actually look like? Because she was serving, like that. You'd think that you can't serve other people for yourself, but you can. And I started thinking about like what our generation looks like, and we live in the Pinterest and social media generation, right? Where we do things all the time for the sake of what we can broadcast to other people. Now, some of you, maybe you're not on social media, you might not get this at all. But if you're on social media, you get this. I started pulling up this picture online. I was thinking about what a Pinterest party would look like. And I was going to throw a picture on the screen, but when I typed in Pinterest party into Google, I saw an article right at the top that kind of caught my attention. I want to read some of what it says. The article was titled, "I threw the perfect Pinterest birthday party, and here's why I regret it." Here's what it says. This lady says, everything looked amazing. She talked about her daughter. She asked her daughter, hey, what kind of birthday do you want? Her daughter said, I want a Shopkins birthday. So she goes on Pinterest, and she's like, great, Shopkins. If you don't know what it is, because you don't have daughters, don't worry about it. But I'm going to find this party. I'm going to find all these ideas. She did. She said, everything looked amazing. I was really proud of myself. She goes on to say, my daughter probably would have been happy with just a few decorations and some Shopkins cupcakes. But I needed to go all out. I'm embarrassed to admit how much time I spent on the party and what my stress levels were before, during, and even after. I didn't have time to enjoy the party because I was so worried about everything looking perfect. Worst of all, I didn't have time to enjoy my daughter. As I was cleaning up after the party was over, I asked myself if I really did all this for my daughter or if I was really just trying to impress our guests with all my decorating and entertaining skills. My heart sank. Of course, the party was for my daughter, but I let those tempting Pinterest ideas take over me and take away from what the day was really about, celebrating my little girl. I started thinking about this personally. At the end of summer, my wife and I, we have 3 kids, and we decided at the end of summer we were going to have some of their friends. We're going to pick a couple of their friends and invite their families over to our house for dinner, and so we did. We had them over, and there was a whole lot that happened, and we had more people than we thought were going to say yes that said yes, and so it was great. We had a ton of people at our house, which meant I spent the entire day kind of going to get tables and chairs, and then as people are showing up, I'm still kind of making the hamburger patties, and I'm pulling in some people to try to help me. And then I spent almost the rest of the night at the grill making hamburgers and hot dogs and stuff like that. And when the night was over, I started thinking, man, I didn't really hang out with anybody. Like, one of the reasons we did this party was not so our kids could hang out with their friends at the end of summer. It's so we could get to know some of their families a little better. Some friends from school and stuff like that. And what I found at the end of the night when it was all over with was that I hadn't spent the time I really wanted to spend with people because I was so caught up in the preparation of everything. My problem was that the party took place with the people. What needed to happen, what was most important, the whole reason we were doing it, got overwhelmed by the party. The people got overwhelmed by the party. Jesus told Martha, he said, you're so concerned with all these things and you're missing one really important thing. You invited me to your house. Can't forget you invited me to your house because your service and my service for God can never replace our stillness with him. Us being in his presence, us enjoying his presence. Verse 41, Martha, Martha, the Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, and indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. I started thinking about what it means that he said only one thing is needed. He said a few things, this translation says a few things are necessary, and he goes, actually only one thing's necessary. I started thinking about one thing. If I had one thing, that was all I needed to do, because I feel like I have to be 7 different people. right? Like as the student pastor here, I have a responsibility to students and their families. I also have a team that I get to work with. A team that I get to kind of oversee, and a team that I work with where I'm under some people and stuff like that. So I've got all these different positions. And I'm also a husband to my wife, Michelle. I'm a father to our 3 kids. I'm a brother. I'm still a son, hopefully a friend. I try to be all these different things. I feel like if I only had to be one of those things, I feel like I could crush that, right? Like if I literally had only one thing I had to do, I feel like I could kill it. And Jesus has told Mary and Martha, he said, there's only one thing that you need to focus on. There's only one thing. And it was stillness before him, resting in his presence. I want to point out that this doesn't mean that none of those other things were going to get done, or actually needed to get done. But she was missing what needed to happen before any of that happened. A couple weeks ago, I got to go with a team to China. And we worked in an orphanage with special needs kids that had a lot of different, a variety of different issues in China at this orphanage. And basically what happened was one orphanage that it was tied to when they really just didn't want to have to deal, this is kind of how they mostly got it, when they really didn't want to have to deal with this kid anymore, they would say, hey, will you take him? And this orphanage would always say yes. And so most of the kids had cerebral palsy and different, a lot of different things. And one of the phrases that kept coming up, or one of the verses that kept coming up over and over and over again for our team was, be still and know that I am God. Psalm 46:10. Because all of us wanted to go on this mission trip and we wanted to do something. But when we got there, we realized there's these kids that they're being taken care of in a lot of ways, but it was less about doing anything. Like I sat there with these kids, I was like, I'm not sure that I can do anything for you. I'm not sure right now that there's anything I can do, and so I just tried to be with them. Just tried to be present with them. Not distracted by anything else, but present with them, just to love them, to show them the love of God, just by being with them. That phrase came up over and over again. That verse came up over and over again. Be still, be still, be still. That verse, be still and know that I am God. Let me give you the bigger context of where that comes from. In Psalm chapter 46, it says, God is our refuge and strength, always ready to help in times of trouble. So we will not fear when earthquakes come and mountains crumble into the sea. Let the oceans roar and foam. Let the mountains tremble and the waters surge. In other words, when all the craziness is going on, when all this busyness is going on, when all this stuff comes crashing down, let it all happen. It says the nations are in chaos and their kingdoms crumble. God's voice thunders and the earth melts. The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. The God of Israel is our fortress. Be still and know that I am God. When everything else is crazy, he says, be still and know that I am God. I will be honored by every nation. I will be honored throughout the world. Then verse 11, it repeats this. The Lord of heaven's armies is here among us. How do we be still in times of chaos? When there's so much that has to happen. How do we be still when so much has to happen around us? Because I don't know about you, most of you guys, you have a million things you have to do. I got some good advice a long time ago from our campus pastor. He said, every single day I leave the office with plenty to do on my list. I never leave the office thinking, man, I did everything I need to do. I said, how do you do it? He said, I realized I have to let it go. Like I could be here for 10 more hours and still not have completed everything I have to do. And it's this picture when everything happens, when everything has to happen, and so many people in here have so many things to do. How do you have stillness before the Lord when you have so much to do? You be still and know that I am God. You understand that the Lord is here among us. Did you know that God is in this place right now? Many of us, if we're honest, would acknowledge, yeah, I know that God is here. But let me ask you a question. Did you walk in and get still enough to actually acknowledge his presence? Not just know that he's here, but to engage and acknowledge his presence when you came. I have a problem, just a personal problem. If this is you, don't take offense to it. I don't like the phrase when people say, this is God's house. Welcome to God's house. God, we come to your house. I don't like that phrase personally, because the truth is God is in this place. Right now, he's here in this place. But when you walk out of that door, he's already wherever you're going. He's with you wherever you go. When you go home, guess what? He's already there, and he's still there when you get there. Because that's his house too. When you go to work, he's there. When you go to school, he's there. When you're in your neighborhood, he's there. When you go to the grocery store, he's there. When you go to the movie theater, he's there. Wherever you go, when you go to wash your car or wash your pet, he's there. Everywhere you go, he is there. You have stillness when you begin to recognize that God is everywhere. You have a stillness of your soul, and you begin to practice the presence of God. There's a book I read years ago. It was one of my favorite books for a long season of my life. It actually wasn't a book written by a guy named Brother Lawrence. It was a group of letters written by a guy named Brother Lawrence. He called himself Brother Lawrence. He was in the 7th century. He was a monk. And he wrote some letters to some people that were later gathered together and put into a book called The Practice of the Presence of God. And what he talks about, this guy was a monk who washed dishes, worked in the kitchen, and then eventually, because of some of the things that he wasn't able to do anymore, began to make sandals. That was his job, to work in the kitchen and to make sandals. And he would send these letters to a colleague, one colleague in particular, and they would go out and they'd be intended for other people. And he talked about practicing the presence of God in everything he did. That when he's washing dishes, he could have joy in washing dishes because he knew that God was there, and he could be still before the Lord while he was working and washing dishes. Here's what he says. He encourages his friend. He says, think of God all the time. During the day, at night, in your daily work, even in your leisure time activities, he is always nearby. Don't ignore him. If you had a friend nearby, you would not ignore him when he came to visit. Why then would you neglect God? In short, do not forget him. Think of him often. Adore him continually. Live and die with him. As Christians, this is our job and calling. This is what we are here for, and it is glorious. My issue when I come to this passage is I was kind of struggling and wrestling with this passage as we've been reading tonight about Mary and Martha, is what a lot of people do is they kind of boil it down to why Mary was better than Martha. Be Mary, don't be Martha. And what they say is because Mary was worshiping and Martha was working. And so they say it's worship over work. Here's why I have a hard time believing that that's the reality of what would happen, because I think we get our prepositions mixed up. It's not worship is better than work, because if that's a reality for you and I, when we go to work, we're missing out, right? Because we have to work. Like there's actually time we have to work. And so does that mean we're in a bad spot now all of a sudden we're Martha because we're working? I think our preposition is mixed up because it's not worship over work. It's worship in our work and through our work. And in everything we do, it's not worship and then this, it's worship through this. When I go into my neighborhood, I'm worshiping. When I go to the grocery store, I recognize the presence of God, and I'm going to worship him in how I live and act and breathe and walk in the grocery store. Everything I do, it's worship through all of what I'm doing all the time. It's about worship all the time. I think the conversation that Jesus was having that day and that we're having tonight is not about stopping doing things. It's about practicing the presence of the Lord in all things and worshiping him, recognizing his presence in all we do, everywhere we go. As I was reading and kind of studying, somebody said a phrase that kind of hit me in a completely different way. The phrase they said was that Martha invited Jesus into her home only to neglect him. And I started thinking about what that would look like for Christians. And my mind kind of took that and went a completely different direction, because I think if I had everybody close your eyes and think about for yourself, and then raise your hand if I said, how many of you have asked Jesus to come into your life or come into your heart? You've given your life to him, whatever it might be, whatever phrase you want to use. Had everybody close their eyes and then raise their hand. I'm going to guess that a majority of people in this room, not everybody in this room by any means, but a majority of people in this room would raise your hand and say, yes, that's me. And we use a phrase about inviting Jesus into our lives, right? But how many of us, if that's a reality, that we've asked God to come into our lives to make us brand new, which by the way, he does. It's not this physical thing of him now coming in and we can go get an x-ray like some of the kids think. So how do I see Jesus in there? Like, how do I see him in my heart? It's not that picture. But we invite him into our lives and he comes in by the Holy Spirit and does a work in our heart and in our life that only he can do. But how many of us have invited him into our, not our house, but our life? And if we look at our life at the end of the day, we would be honest and say, you know what? I went through an entire day with Jesus in my life and I neglected him. If I take inventory of my day, if I'm really honest, I've gone through my entire day and neglected him. Even if I'm doing spiritual things, even if I'm doing spiritual work, even if I'm trying to serve Jesus, which is what Martha was doing. She invited him in. She was a great person trying to take care of him. She was serving Jesus. Again, she was probably trying to bring him stuff. She's probably trying to make a meal for him. Some people came and showed up today and made a lot of meals for some people. We can do some really good spiritual work and still neglect Jesus. It frightens me to think that I could be successful in a lot of things, but not what matters most. And Jesus says, Martha, you're missing what matters most. I'm here. Don't miss me. And again, I don't think that Jesus was saying, you're not allowed to work. We don't need a meal tonight. I don't think it was any of those kind of things. I don't think we see that as a reality in anything in Scripture. But he's saying, don't miss me in all of this. People like Mary, who we find 3 different times, by the way, in the gospel accounts, 3 different times she's mentioned at the feet of Jesus. Consistently submitting and posturing herself at the feet of Jesus. Building a habit of being at the feet of Jesus. I think that's what all of us that are like Martha, that relate to Martha, need to build a habit of. Consistently being in the presence of Jesus, practicing the presence of God in all that we do, consistently being at his feet, submitting, listening to what he would say, and submitting to what he says, which some of us have a problem with as well. But posturing ourselves to be at the feet of Jesus. People like Mary remind us there's only one thing that no one else can do for you and me. Nobody else can give your attention, your affection, your devotion, and your worship to Jesus. Only you can. I can't do it for you. Craig can't do it for you. Chris, the band can't do it for you. Your husband or wife can't do it for you. Your mom or your dad can't do it for you. Every single one of us has to make this choice for ourselves. Whether we're going to, in all that we do, practice the presence of God. And when we do, it changes the way we live. It changes the way we work. It changes the way we serve. It changes the way we love. It changes everything. When we walk humbly in his presence, because only you can give yourself to Jesus, to be in his presence. I'm going to end a little bit differently tonight. I'm going to ask you to bow your heads for just a moment. I'm going to ask you not to be distracted, but to ask. If you say, you know what, I'm a follower of Jesus, I've invited him into my life, to ask yourself the question. Better yet, to ask God the question. God, am I neglecting the fulfillment of my soul for a million things that are never going to fill my soul? They might be good things. Not evil things, good things. But God, am I missing you? If you wonder, begin to take inventory of your days. And ask, am I exchanging the one necessary thing for all the other things? No one else can answer that question for you. The reality is you have things to do. I have things to do. We have things we have to do, but not at the expense of filling your soul with the recognition that the God of the universe desires to be in a constant day-to-day relationship with you. There's some of you in here today who you say, you know what, if I'm honest, I've never given my life to God. I've never entered into his presence. I've never started a relationship with Jesus that you're talking about. We would love to talk to you about that in just a second. I want you to know one thing. You don't have to be clean to come to his feet. You don't have to be clean to come into his presence. If you don't know him, I want to challenge you in just a moment. We're going to sing a song. I want to challenge you to stand and come forward and say, I need to start a relationship with Jesus. Make the greatest decision you could ever make. Receive grace like you've never seen before. Start a relationship with Jesus today. But for the Christians, as we have this time, I'm going to ask in just a moment when we sing the song, you keep your heads bowed and your eyes closed and just ask God to continue to work in your life. Take this as a time to just be still before him. Maybe for some of you, you've had an incredibly crazy week. This is a moment, just a short time, where you say, you know what, God, I'm going to be still before you. And maybe for some of you, you need to be reminded of the joy of being still in his presence again. And instead of looking up and singing a song because it's being sung or watching people that might be coming forward or anything like that, just sit still and just be in his presence for just a moment before you walk out that door and it starts getting crazy all over again. Practice right now the presence of God in this place. So I'm going to pray. And after I pray, after I say amen, if you're in relationship with Jesus, I want to encourage you to be still before him for the next few minutes. For some of you in the room, you say, I don't have a relationship with Jesus. I'm going to invite you to stand and come after I pray while we sing this song. If you need to join this church family, we're going to invite you to stand and come, to be a part of a family that wants to practice the presence of God in all that we do. Not perfect by any means, but that's definitely our heartbeat. If you need to join this church family, when I pray and we sing in just a moment, you stand and come, say, I want to be part of this church family.